Chag Sameach, everyone. This is the second Chag that is in the shadow of the pandemic. We've had Passover individually, and now we have Shavuot. But the good news is that God willing, this is the last Chag that all of us will spend in isolation, or at least so we hope. On Shavuot, we celebrate the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And the question that we can pose to ourselves is, why is this holiday called by our sages, the rabbis of old, Chag Matan Torah, which means the holiday of the giving of the Torah, rather than Chag Kabbalat HaTorah, the holiday of the receiving of the Torah? And the answer is that the Torah was given to us by God Almighty at a certain point in history, a time beyond time, mystical time. But receiving the Torah, living in vigor and dignity and elevation in light of the Torah, receiving the Torah, is a lifelong endeavor to live in light of the Torah. It was Muhammad, of all people, who first termed our people, the Jewish people, the people of the book. The Jewish contribution to Western civilization in terms of intellect and knowledge in the arts and sciences is incalculable. Even though the number of Jews in the world is smaller than the statistical margin of error in a Chinese census. There are only about 13 million of us in the world entire. By way of comparison, Los Angeles County is 10 million people. In the whole world, there are 13 million Jews. Reminds me the story about the Indian guy who asked an Israeli youngster in India, "Tell me, how many Israelis are there?" And the Israeli guy said, 8 million. And the Indian guy said, "No, I don't mean in India, I mean worldwide." We make a lot of noise for small people, and our contribution to humanity in the arts and sciences is indispensable. Suffice it to say that some 20% of the recipients of the Nobel Prize all over the world constitutes of individuals of Jewish descent and origin. And three of the chief architects of the modern mind and the way we understand the human condition in modern times, Einstein, Marx, and Freud, were also of Jewish lineage. And Paul Johnson, the great Catholic historian, in his magisterial work, A History of the Jews, says that Rabbinic Judaism is the world's finest system for the systemic production of intellectuals ever devised. And yet, what I want to suggest to you is that even though on Shavuot we celebrate the giving of the Torah, and we celebrate the Torah as the portable homeland of the Jewish people, as German Jewish poet Heinrich Heine did well to observe, even though the Torah is the portable home of the Jewish people, even though we champion and prize learnings, even though we are the kind of civilization whose heroes are teachers and whose palaces are schools, we read on Shavuot a book that has no halachic bearings. The sages asked in a midrash, Ruth Rabbah, why do we read the book of Shavuot, the book of Ruth on Shavuot? It has nothing to say about the pure and the impure, about the prohibited and the permitted. There are no mitzvot specifically stipulated in the book of Ruth. Why do we read this book? The answer is that in the book of Ruth, we learn the Torah of Chesed, the Torah of loving kindness. In English, we have a word, ruthless. It means a person who is devoid of the charitable and benevolent qualities and attributes of Ruth. Ruth followed her mother-in-law, Naomi, at a time of great hardship, stayed loyal to her, and despite her pleadings, sacrificed, or so she thought, her own future for the sake of her mother-in-law. And then Boaz marries Ruth in an act of chesed and loving kindness. The word chesed, a gratuitous, intrinsic act of loving kindness, which is agenda-free and interest-free, appears 3 times in the book of Ruth. And I believe that the sages coded for us reading the book of Ruth on Shavuot in order to send us a very deep and important message. They say, even though Judaism is the kind of culture and civilization which prizes and cherishes learning and the life of the mind and intellectual and academic achievements, ultimately the Torah is a Torah shel chesed, a Torah of loving kindness, a Torah of helping others in need. In a world in which people are all too often mesmerized by external socioeconomic and academic achievements and titles and credentials, on Shavuot, in which we celebrate the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, the rabbis and the sages are telling us, yes, it's wonderful to go and learn and grow in soul and grow in Torah and frequent secular academic halls of study and pursue higher learning in great universities throughout the United States and develop and cultivate careers. At the end of the day, the Torah is the Torah of Abraham and Sarah, the Torah of chesed, the Torah of loving kindness, the Torah of helping those in need. I want to remind you, beloved friends, 2 very gruesome facts. One is, if you're familiar with the Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference was a conference outside Berlin in which the heads of the Nazi regimes formulated the so-called final solution for the Jews of Europe, namely their systemic murder for the 11 million Jews of Europe at the time. And most of them were indeed murdered, 6 of the 11 million. Of the attendees of the Wannsee Nazi Conference, most of them were doctors. They had either MDs or PhDs. Most of them were doctors. And when our brothers and sisters arrived in the camps and got off their trains, the Germans played string quartets, Mozart and Beethoven on the train platforms. Precisely on this holiday of Shavuot, our sages are telling us, yes, learn, achieve, conquer, excel, and expand. But remember, intellect is but a means to an end. Ultimately, as David Brooks does well to observe in his book, The Road to Character, there are 2 kinds of virtues that we carry in our life: the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are went to this and that university, worked in this and that company, occupied this or that role in that organization or company. The eulogy virtues are completely different. They're about contribution, they're about character, they're about devotion, they're about selflessness, they're about sacrifice, they're about chesed. Ultimately, we will be remembered for what we gave to others and for being for others, not for our external achievements, but for the strength of our character. This is why we read the book of Ruth on Shavuot. Remember, more than anything, the Torah was given to us, according to the sages, letzaref et habriot, to refine the soul, to grow in soul, to grow in character, to become altruistic beings who are here also to illuminate and enhance the lives of others, all the more so in these tumultuous times that we're all facing together. Let us continue to support each other and our families and our communities. And Be'ezat Hashem, the next Chag, many of us will celebrate together in concert, in jubilation, in joy, and in true brotherhood. Amen and Chag Sameach.